Welcome to the Startup Grind.
I just want to talk a little bit today about marketing, primarily my experiences in marketing to consumers. And so, next slide. Do I have a clicker? Oh, awesome. Great. That would make sense. Cool. So just a little bit about me. I was one of the co-founders of a company called Udemy. How many people here know what Udemy does? Awesome. Great. So real quick, it's an online marketplace for courses. Basically, you can go on udemy.com and learn from the best experts in the world on various subjects. Sort of our more popular subjects are in the tech industry. So things like learning how to program, learning how to market yourself, learning how to build a blog. And then obviously we have tons of other courses in subjects like yoga or cooking or really anything you want to learn. At the company, we've raised over $16 million total. We have over 500,000 users. That's the last public number. And we were able to build about a network of about 5,000 instructors who've created well over that in courses. Also mentor and advise, and currently I'm sort of like looking for my next company, and while doing that I started a thing called the Growth Hacker Conference. So generally speaking, I think of marketing or sort of like user acquisition in 3 phases. And though I won't be able to go into the details of what each of those phases mean, I will sort of provide a sort of framework that I think if you're building a company and trying to handle, or at a company, trying to handle the user acquisition problem, you ought to be sort of following a framework similar to this. I think really if you talk to anybody in the sort of in the growth hacker community or in the marketing community, all of them have generally a similar sort of framework to go by. So the first thing is that your product really does matter. I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs who have a really, whose product is pretty far from where their customers need, and I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs who have no trouble whatsoever getting customers because of how sort of valuable and easy the product is to use. And so it's really, really important to think of the first phase of building a user base as building a great product. I would highly recommend sort of having a very strict focus. As a sort of like a founder or executive in a company, it's very easy to get distracted by 15 to 20 different things. And I tend to really, really try, and I'll often call out team members and say, look, stop focusing on growth. It's time for us just to get the right product, make sure everything works. And I would recommend that you discipline yourself very strongly in the early stages of your company to focus on that. Udemy 1.0, classic example. We started off with a live conferencing solution that basically allowed anyone to build an online live course. Today, almost all of Udemy courses are recorded. So one of the big growing pains early on in Udemy, which took actually over 3 years to figure out, by the way, because my co-founders had started this company 3 years prior to anybody here ever hearing about it. We had over 100,000 lines of code written before the site launched in the United States. It launched in Turkey first, which is where my co-founders are from. We put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into a product that really just didn't mean a whole lot to the end user, because it was so inconvenient to schedule a live class that the benefit of having a live instructor was not worth the cost of scheduling, essentially. That sounds like a really easy and obvious thing today to hear about now that, with all the sort of recorded online courses platforms. But back in 2010, when we came to this realization, we were the first ones to move away from live to recorded. And pretty much any VC or entrepreneur at the time, many of which had raised decent amounts of money, were all talking about live education online. And one of the first understandings that we had early on, and kind of you could call it luck or you could call it just insight, but was figuring out that, hey, let's move away from live courses. That's really important to sort of figure that out for your customer, for your user base. Once you figure out that you have a product that some people like, the question is who likes it and how many of them are there? And really focusing in by doing interviews on the right instructor as opposed to the wrong instructor. I won't go into this example, we just don't have time. Awesome. But I will say that what I would recommend you do is really conduct half an hour, hour-long interviews with your target market. I recently am doing some consulting, so I join new companies and work with them. Companies that have already been in existence. Currently I'm working with Lyft. which is the ride-sharing app in San Francisco. And one of the first things that I do when I come into a new company is just interview as many customers as possible. Usually between 5 to 10 is enough. I wouldn't go past 10, so I guess not as many as possible, but 5 to 10 sort of customers or target markets, so that you understand exactly what people are thinking, why do they buy the product, what is it that really gets them to change from yes, from sort of like maybe, or I kind of like it, to yes. And obviously be very careful and have a lot of self-doubt around potentially people lying to you, because generally people's interest is making you happy and not telling you the truth, right? The next thing, and this is just sort of a theme, early on in a startup, you don't have enough data to have the sample size necessary to make accurate decisions solely based on the numbers. So it's very important to realize that early on, while you ought to install the metrics into your application and make sure you're tracking every click, don't spend too much time looking at it. Getting 200 hits a day is meaningless. It literally is meaningless. You can get 200 hits a day just by putting your website up and having 1,000 pages on the site that are all made by people in the Philippines. It's easy, okay? The hard part is to actually build a user base that's sustainable, that grows over time. And in order to do that, the decisions that you're making have to be more art than science. And as you build the company, you'll move from art to science. You'll move from very clear, like very unclear, uncertain situations where you're just sort of feeling out what a landing page should be like and showing them to users, to, hey, we're showing this landing page to 2,000 people in the last 2 hours, and we've shown the other landing page to 2,000 people, and the second one won. Your classic A/B test, right? That's easy to do when you've grown, but early on you can't do that. And I imagine many of you are in earlier stage companies, and it's important to realize the differences there. The next thing, once you've figured out who your users are and done a lot of research, and honestly, like, you should feel like you could walk down the street and after meeting someone for 30 seconds, you would know whether or not they would like your product, and you would know why they would like their product. If you can't do that and you can't then sell them on your product in person, you're not sufficient yet. You're not proficient at your own user base. So for your first time interviewing customers, you may want to spend more like 20 to 30 times and then go out and test whether or not those interviews really made sense and whether you really learned from them or not. The next step is distribution. It's figuring out what channels are going to work. At Udemy, we had 3 different phases in our distribution, so it's not like we found one magical channel and all of a sudden we were growing to sort of like a $6-10 million run rate business. And from what I've heard from other companies, LinkedIn, for example, had very distinct phases of growth. And you're going to have the same thing. So I would consider it that you're basically in distribution, you're going fishing, but you're going to have to go fishing constantly. And what that means is you're going to have to go try 5 to 10 different things, and only one of them are going to work. Which is a really tough thing for an entrepreneur, because it means that you're sometimes spending development time and resources on projects that literally fail within a matter of weeks. And so it's very important to reduce the cycle times as much as possible on those tests, and to create very clear and simple tests that allow you to understand whether or not your distribution channels really work. A good example of that is, at Udemy, one of the big questions that we had was whether or not certain types of courses will sell better than others. But the problem is that creating a course takes an instructor up to a month and a half. Well, as someone who needed to raise money in the next 3 to 6 months, it was impossible to wait for a bunch of tests to take a month and a half to even get started, right? And then another month of data because we didn't have enough people visiting the site. So what we did was we basically started to fake the course. We'd build a third of the course in a couple of days, put it up, and then promote that course to an audience and say, hey, this is the course, are you interested in buying it, even though the rest of the course is not going to come up until the future. So you'll get the course in phases, right? It's a simple thing, but there was a lot of controversy at Udemy about essentially what some people thought was disingenuous to the user base, right? Personally, I don't think it's disingenuous at all. That's how all the other online courses platforms now work. But again, at the time, you can see why there was controversy, right? And so because of that, we eventually were able to make that test, and we're able to much more quickly understand who wanted our product and whether or not certain products were going to work. And then we could focus our course acquisition efforts on courses that we thought people really cared about. Real quick, going through the channels of different things, one of the things people don't talk about enough that really works in marketplace or B2B businesses is leveraging people in the Philippines and in call centers to basically drastically reduce your costs on actions that don't take a lot of thought. Examples of those actions are cold emails. So if you're cold emailing people right now in your job, stop. Hire someone in the Philippines for $2 to $3 an hour. Teach them how to do the cold emailing. They're very intelligent people, and for them this is really good money. Teach them how to do it. Use Odesk to do this. Teach them how to do it. Teach them how to do your job. And then have them do all the cold emails on your email account. And then you only have to deal with the replies. So you only deal with qualified leads at that point. It's a way of turning outbound sales into inbound sales, essentially. The next thing is viral word of mouth. A lot has been written on this. I recommend you read Andrew Chen's blog. The next thing is paid. The biggest thing about paid is that it's really tantalizing as an entrepreneur when you're starting off to build your user base via paid marketing, or at least do tests via paid marketing. What I caution almost everybody who's doing this on is that you never get the sample size without spending a sufficient amount of money. Because of the various phases of paid acquisition, both dealing with the very top level advertising, just figuring out what ad is going to be most effective on Facebook or Google, all the way down to converting customers, which sometimes can take months, right? At Udemy, we don't see conversions sometimes for 6 months to a year on a product. You can't afford to do paid advertising unless you have a $50,000 a month budget, I think. 20 minimum, 50,000 is ideal. So don't bother with it. Use it perhaps to test specific things. So hey, I'm going to test if this landing page works. I'm going to spend $2,000 because it's going to solve my problem of testing whether a landing page works, right? If you have that kind of money, great. If you have that kind of money, you should probably be willing to invest $50K a month. But if you don't get too bogged down in paid acquisition. And even though it's harder and much more difficult for you, you'll thank me later if you start focusing on acquisition channels that are a lot less scalable. Examples could be, let me see if an example is next. Content marketing, writing viral blog posts, and sort of other, and infographics and things like that can basically engage your user base without spending a whole lot of money. So in the beginning, the founder can do that themselves, which is great because you're not paying anyone to do that, and therefore it's somewhat free. Another example that's not on here that we use a lot at Udemy is affiliate, or sort of like email lists. So we would partner with people who are in our target market. We do this at Lyft now too, and we basically give them a rev share of some sort, or we give them some incentive to promote our product to their user base. And in that way, we're able to test our product on a much smaller volume. You know, these email lists often have 10,000 people, maybe 50,000 people or whatever. But it's a much quicker and more cost-effective way to test whether or not people actually want the product and to get an initial user base going. Finally, the question always comes up, hey, I don't think I'm the right person at my company to be doing the marketing or user acquisition. Who do I hire to do that? I'm going to skip this. And I would highly recommend, I have a very specific criteria that I have, but all these things are, there's a lot of different ways to do this. My ideal sort of growth hacker type is someone, of course someone who already has experience. That's very hard to get, usually very expensive, and most likely not going to be able to get that. But my ideal type is someone who worked in corporate America and therefore has a strong familiarity with spreadsheets, particularly Excel. If they know SQL or Access because they had to do that in their job, that's even better because they're highly numbers driven. Someone who has a fair level of creativity, so the second step in their career is often trying to start their own thing. That could be a full-blown company that's raised a couple $100,000, or it could be a company that is just sort of, that they just sort of started a conference, or they started a local meetup group that grew to a few thousand people. Something that shows that they can handle sort of the business side of life, if you will, right? And then now they want that, whatever they were doing before was insufficient for them, and that either their company failed or whatever, and then you hire them. Literally out of the 8 people or 7 people I've ever hired in this position, so clearly you don't have a lot of these people at your companies, you have very few, right? At this position, almost all of them fit that entire criteria, to be honest with you. And so I found former consultants, former bankers, who have then shown an entrepreneurial bent to be the best sort of target market of people to hire. Yeah, good luck. It's really hard to do user acquisition. Have a lot of patience and be extremely, extremely analytical. If you can't be numbers driven analytical, at least have a lot of self-doubt about whether or not your assumptions, like a scientist, whether or not your assumptions are really accurate and what assumptions you're making when you're building, you're doing your tests, because that will better allow you to interpret the results. Good luck. Thank you.